My husband drained our savings for a luxury Maldives vacation with his girlfriend, while telling me we couldn't afford my mother's cancer treatments. What he didn't know was, I still had access to all his accounts. One transfer later, his romantic getaway turned into a very public explanation to hotel security about his missing reservation. By the time he called me panicking, I was already meeting with divorce lawyers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was a perfectly ordinary Thursday evening when my world collapsed. I remember it clearly. The gentle hum of the dishwasher in the background, the lingering smell of the pasta dinner I'd made, and the steady rain tapping against the kitchen window. These normal, everyday details make what happened next feel even more surreal. I was paying bills, something I did religiously on the third Thursday of every month. Lucas and I had been married for 8 years, and while we kept separate accounts, for our personal spending, we shared a joint savings account for emergencies and our future. It was something we'd agreed on early in our marriage, a symbol of our shared dreams and trust. My mother had been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer the month before. The doctors were optimistic, but the treatment wasn't fully covered by her insurance. Lucas and I had discussed using some of our savings to help cover the gap. "We'll look at the numbers next month," he'd said. "Let's see what we can afford." That night, as I logged into our joint account to transfer my monthly contribution, I noticed something strange. The balance was dramatically lower than it should have been. Not a small discrepancy that could be explained by a forgotten bill or miscalculation. This was a withdrawal of $12,400. My stomach dropped. We had just over $35,000 saved, money for emergencies, for a down payment on a house someday, for starting a family. And now more than a third of it was gone. I scrolled through the recent transactions, thinking there must be some mistake. But there it was. A transfer to Lucas's personal account 3 days earlier. No note, no explanation, nothing to indicate why he would need such a large sum without discussing it with me first. With trembling hands, I texted him. "Just saw a big withdrawal from our savings. Everything okay?" His response came almost immediately. "Yeah, don't worry about it. Had to move some money around for work. We'll explain later." Something in his casual dismissal set off alarm bells. Lucas was an account executive at a marketing firm. There was no reason he'd need to move money around for work, especially from our personal savings. I tried to push away the gnawing feeling in my stomach. I trusted Lucas. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a surprise he was planning, or perhaps he'd found an investment opportunity. Still, the timing couldn't have been worse. Not with my mother's medical bills looming. I finished paying the regular bills, trying to focus on the task at hand, rather than the unexplained withdrawal, but my mind kept returning to it, like a tongue probing a sore tooth. After closing the laptop, I poured myself a glass of wine and tried to relax with a book. But the words blurred on the page, my thoughts too scattered to focus. Lucas came home, late that night, as he had been doing more frequently over the past few months. "Client dinner," he explained with a quick kiss on my cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne and whiskey. "How was it?" I asked, watching his face carefully. "Productive," he said with a shrug, loosening his tie. "Think we're close to landing the Peterson account?" I wanted to ask about the money. It was right there on the tip of my tongue. But something held me back. His slightly glassy eyes, the way he avoided looking directly at me, the unusual stiffness in his movements. Instead, I said, "I talked to Mom's doctor today. They want to start treatments next week. We need to figure out how we're going to help with the costs." Lucas's shoulders tensed visibly. "Kelly, we discussed this. I'm not sure we can swing it right now. Money's tight with the market the way it is. Her insurance should cover the basics." But what about the experimental treatment her oncologist recommended? The one with the higher success rate? Insurance won't touch that, and it could make all the difference. He sighed, the sound heavy with impatience. Look, we have to be realistic here. We can't just throw money at every problem. We have our future to think about too. The words hit me like a physical blow. My mother's life, potentially the difference between life and death, was being dismissed as throwing money at a problem. And this from the man who had just withdrawn over $12,000 without a word of explanation. What about the money you took from our savings? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the anger rising in my chest. That's a lot. To move around for work. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. A flash of something, guilt, annoyance, crossed his face before settling back into careful neutrality. It's complicated, he said, running a hand through his hair. Work stuff. I'll put it back soon. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is, okay? I'm exhausted and not in the mood for an interrogation. He walked past me toward the bedroom. Conversation effectively ended. I sat there in stunned silence, the familiar walls of our living room suddenly feeling like those of a stranger's house. 8 years of marriage, and he couldn't even give me a straight answer about our own money that could help save my mother's life. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay beside Lucas, listening to his even breathing, and felt miles away from him. Something wasn't right. The withdrawal, his evasiveness, the late nights, all of it formed a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Morning came, and, with it, a decision. I would find out what was going on, one way or another. I waited until Lucas left for work, kissing me distractedly on his way out the door as if nothing was wrong, as if he hadn't just prioritized some mysterious work thing over my mother's cancer treatment. Once he was gone, I sat down at my computer. Lucas and I had always been open with our passwords and accounts, not because we regularly checked up on each other, but because we'd never felt the need for secrecy. I navigated to his personal bank account, holding my breath as I typed in his password. What I saw there would change everything. The screen glowed before me, illuminating a truth I wasn't prepared to face. There it was in black and white. A transaction for $9,880 to Paradise Resorts Maldives, dated just 2 days after he'd withdrawn the money from our joint savings. Next to it was a smaller charge to an airline, 2 first-class tickets totaling $5,400. My hands began to shake. The Maldives. Lucas and I had talked about going there for years. Those iconic overwater bungalows, the crystal-clear turquoise water. It was supposed to be our dream trip, something we'd saved for to celebrate a major milestone together. And now he was going. But not with me. 2 tickets. 2 first-class tickets. The implications crashed over me in waves, each realization worse than the last. Lucas was planning a luxury vacation with someone else while telling me we couldn't afford to help save my mother's life. He had stolen from our future, from my future, to create memories with another woman. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen as tears blurred my vision. Minutes, maybe hours. Time seemed to stretch and contract all at once. My chest felt hollow, as if something vital had been scooped out, leaving nothing but an aching emptiness in its place. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break things. I wanted to call him immediately and demand answers, to hear him try to explain away the inexplicable. But beneath the hurt and anger, another emotion was taking hold. A cold, clear determination. I scrolled through his transaction history, looking for more evidence. And there it was, a pattern of withdrawals and charges that told a story of their own. Dinners at expensive restaurants I'd never been to. A charge at Tiffany & Co. for $2,300. Hotel charges in the city where we lived. He hadn't even bothered to hide it well. How long had this been going on? How long had I been living with a stranger who wore my husband's face, The thought made me physically ill. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I rushed to the bathroom and retched until there was nothing left inside me. When I finally stood up and looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale and drawn with shock. But there was something else there too, a hardness that hadn't been there before, a resolve forming around the edges of her pain. I splashed cold water on my face and took a deep breath. Then another. The initial shock was giving way to something more dangerous. Clarity. I thought about my mother, fighting for her life while Lucas decided her treatment wasn't worth throwing money at. I thought about the years I'd spent supporting his career, moves, celebrating his successes as if they were our shared victories. I thought about the children we'd talked about having someday, when we were financially ready, all while he was spending our money on another woman. The pain was transforming, now crystallizing into something sharper, more focused. It wasn't just about the money or even the affair. It was about the casual cruelty of his choices, the calculated selfishness that allowed him to look me in the eye day after day while systematically betraying everything we'd built together. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. Working late. Of course. Another lie to add to the growing pile. I didn't respond. What could I possibly say? Enjoy your affair? How's the trip planning going? Does she know you're married? Instead, I set the phone down and returned to the computer. I began taking screenshots, downloading bank statements, creating a digital paper trail of his betrayal. I wasn't yet sure what I would do with this information, but some instinct told me to gather evidence, to protect myself. As I worked, a strange calm settled over me. The tears had stopped. The shaking had subsided. In their place was a focus, so intense it almost scared me. A single-minded determination to not be the victim of Lucas's story. He had made his choice. Now I would make mine. I thought about calling someone, my sister, my best friend, but the words died in my throat. How could I explain what I'd discovered? How could I admit that my marriage, which everyone thought was so perfect, had been built on lies? The humiliation burned almost as intensely as the betrayal. No, this wasn't something I could share. Not yet. First, I needed to figure out what to do next. I closed my eyes, trying to think through the fog of emotions. The Maldives reservation. I checked the confirmation emails in his account. The trip was scheduled for next week. He'd told me he had a business conference in Chicago, another lie in his growing collection. A thought formed, small at first, then expanding until it filled my mind with crystalline clarity. I still had access to all of his accounts. Our finances were still intertwined. And if he could make decisions about our money without consulting me, perhaps I could do the same. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What I was considering crossed a line. But hadn't he already shattered every boundary between us? Hadn't he already turned our marriage into a zero-sum game where only one of us could win? I didn't want revenge. Not exactly. What I wanted was justice, balance, to reclaim what was rightfully mine. With steady hands, I began to explore my options. The joint savings account from which he'd stolen was in both our names. Legally, I had as much right to that money as he did. And his personal accounts. I had access to those too, not because I'd ever intruded before, but because we'd once trusted each other enough to share everything. That trust was gone now, obliterated by his choices. All that remained was the practical reality. I could see his money and I could move it. I looked at the calendar. The Maldives trip was in 6 days. The resort required full payment upon arrival. The airline tickets were already purchased. A plan began to form, not born from vengeance, but from a profound need to restore balance, to ensure that Lucas felt the consequences of his actions in the same way I was feeling them now. If he could use our money to betray me, I could use that same access to protect myself. I wasn't just a wronged wife. I was a woman with agency, with options. And for the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt something other than pain. Power. Lucas and I met at a charity fundraiser 8 years ago. I was working for the nonprofit hosting the event, and he was there representing his company, a rising star in his marketing firm, charismatic and ambitious. When he approached me at the end of the night to compliment my work on the event, I was instantly drawn to his confidence, his easy smile, the way he seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Fancy, restaurants, weekend getaways, thoughtful gifts that showed he'd been paying attention to my casual mentions of things I loved. 6 months in, he surprised me with a trip to Vermont during fall foliage season. He'd remembered me saying it was on my bucket list. Standing among those brilliant red and gold trees, he got down on one knee and promised to build a beautiful life with me. "We're going to be unstoppable together, Kelly," he'd said, slipping the ring onto my finger. "You and me against the world." I believed him. God, I believed every word. The first 2 years of our marriage were everything I'd hoped. Before we moved into a charming townhouse, merged our finances, and started planning for the future. Lucas was supportive of my career at the nonprofit, even though it didn't pay nearly as well as his corporate job. "Do what you love," he'd insist. "I make enough for both of us." I remember the night we created our vision board together. Pictures of our dream house, the places we wanted to travel, even the number of children we hoped to have. We decided to start a joint savings account, our future fund, as Lucas called it. Every month, we'd each contribute a percentage of our income, watching with pride as the balance grew. "This is us building our dreams, brick by brick," he'd say as we updated our budget spreadsheet together. When I think back to those early days, it's hard to reconcile that man with the one who stole from our savings to take another woman to the Maldives. The changes were so gradual, I barely noticed them happening. It started around our 3rd anniversary. Lucas was passed over for a promotion he'd been certain was his. Something shifted in him after that rejection. A new edge to his ambition. A hunger that hadn't been there before. He started working longer hours, networking more aggressively. Weekend brunches with me were replaced by golf games with potential clients. Date nights became increasingly rare, canceled at the last minute for emergency meetings that couldn't wait. I supported him through it all, believing this was just a phase, a necessary sacrifice on the road to success. When he finally got a promotion the following year, I thought things would improve. They didn't. Instead, the goalposts seemed to shift. Now he needed to prove himself in the new position. Now there were bigger clients to land, more important connections to make. Our home became little more than a place where Lucas showered and changed clothes between work commitments. "This is for us," he'd say whenever I expressed concern about how little we saw each other. "I'm building security for our future." Meanwhile, that future kept getting postponed. When I brought up starting a family, something we'd planned to do by our 5th anniversary, Lucas had a new reason why now isn't the right time. First, it was the promotion. Then, it was waiting until he had established himself in the new role. Then, it was the unstable economy. I didn't push back as hard as I should have. Part of me understood his practical concerns, and part of me had grown accustomed to rearranging my expectations around his priorities. I'd become an expert at rationalization, at making excuses for the growing distance between us. Looking back, I can see how the power balance in our relationship shifted so subtly I barely noticed it happening. Lucas began making unilateral decisions about our finances, investments I didn't fully understand, expenses he deemed necessary for his career advancement. The joint decisions of our early marriage gave way to Lucas informing me after the fact, with the assumption that I would agree with his choices, Trust me, he'd say with that confident smile that had once made me feel so secure. I know what I'm doing. And I did trust him. Even as our bank account grew while our emotional connection withered, I trusted that somewhere beneath the designer, suits and networking events was the man who had promised me forever among the autumn leaves. When my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer 2 months ago, I saw a flash of my old Lucas. He held me while I cried, brought home my favorite takeout, sat with me as I researched treatment options. For a moment, I thought this crisis might bring us back to what mattered: family, love, being there for each other. Then came the conversations about money, about what we could realistically afford to contribute to her treatment, about how experimental procedures were financially risky, about how we needed to think pragmatically rather than emotionally. Each time I brought up using our savings, money that had been set aside for emergencies and important life events, Lucas would find a reason to hesitate, to delay, to suggest alternatives that didn't involve touching that account. "We should look into fundraising," he suggested once. "Or maybe your sister could contribute more?" My sister, a single mother of 2 working as a teacher. The suggestion was so tone-deaf, it left me speechless. Still, I never suspected he was saving that money for something else, someone else. I never imagined he would look at our joint savings and see not our shared future, but a way to finance his betrayal. The night before I discovered the truth, we'd had dinner together, a rare occurrence that I'd been pathetically grateful for. Lucas had been distracted, checking his phone repeatedly, but I'd chosen to ignore it, to focus instead on having his attention for a few precious hours. "I talked to Mom's doctor again," I'd said carefully, aware of how tense our conversations about her treatment had become. "He really thinks this new protocol could make a difference. The success rates are promising." Lucas had nodded, his expression sympathetic but distant. "I know you want to do everything possible, Kelly, but we have to be smart about this. Let's see what standard treatments can do first before we start looking at options insurance won't cover." "But what if waiting means losing our window of opportunity?" I'd asked, fighting to keep the desperation out of my voice. "What if—" "Kelly," he'd cut me off gently but firmly. "I understand this is emotional for you. But sometimes we have to accept that throwing money at a problem doesn't always solve it." Throwing money at a problem? As if my mother's life was just a problem to be managed, a line item in our budget to be assessed for its return on investment. I remember going to bed that night feeling guilty for pushing, for making Lucas uncomfortable, with my persistence. I remember wondering if I was being unreasonable, if my emotional connection to the situation was clouding my judgment. Now, sitting in front of the computer with evidence of his deception glowing on the screen, those doubts evaporated like morning mist. This wasn't about pragmatism or financial responsibility. This wasn't about protecting our future. This was about Lucas choosing himself and another woman over everything and everyone else. Over my mother. Over me. Over the vows he'd made. The history of our relationship unfurled before me like a map, showing not the path I thought we'd been on, but the one Lucas had actually been carving, away from me, toward whatever and whoever served his desires in the moment. 8 years of memories suddenly looked different through the lens of his betrayal. Every late night. Every business trip. Every time he'd shut down conversations about our future with practical concerns about money. How much of it had been real? And how much had I simply wanted to believe? As I sat there piecing together the evidence of Lucas's double life, memories began flooding back. Moments I'd dismissed, red flags I'd rationalized away. The signs had been there all along, waving frantically in my face while I deliberately looked the other way. 6 months ago, Lucas changed his phone password. We'd always known each other's codes, not because we snooped, but because we had nothing to hide. When I asked about it casually, he'd shrugged and said, Too many client confidentiality issues with my phone now. Corporate policy. I believed him without question. Then there was the new cologne, an expensive brand I'd never smelled on him before. When it appeared on our credit card statement, I mentioned that I hadn't seen the bottle at home. "It's at the office," he explained smoothly, "for late meetings when I need to freshen up." Again, I accepted the explanation, ignoring the voice in my head that whispered, "Since when does Lucas care about freshening up for work meetings?" There were other changes too, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. The new workout regimen that had him at the gym 4 mornings a week. The sudden interest in his wardrobe, replacing perfectly good clothes with more expensive versions. The mysterious weekend work retreats that he could never quite describe in detail afterward. "Just boring corporate stuff," he'd say with a dismissive wave. "You wouldn't have enjoyed it." Looking back, I could see how strategically he'd built his deception, constructing it piece by piece while I stood by and watched, convincing myself these changes were just part of his professional evolution. How willfully blind I had been. And then there was Taylor. I'd met her at Lucas's holiday office party last December, tall, confident, with a sharp laugh that carried across the room. She was new to the marketing team, Lucas explained, a rising talent he was mentoring. I noticed how she touched his arm when she laughed at his jokes, how her eyes lingered on him a beat too long. But I'd pushed away my discomfort, telling myself I was being paranoid, that professional relationships could look overly familiar to outsiders. "Taylor's been a huge asset to the team," Lucas had said on the drive home. "She thinks outside the box, not afraid to take risks." After that night, her name started appearing in his stories about work with increasing frequency. Taylor landed a big client. Taylor suggested a brilliant campaign strategy. Taylor was being fast-tracked for promotion. When I teased him about his apparent admiration for his protégé, Lucas had become defensive. "I'm just acknowledging good work," he'd said sharply. "That's what good leaders do." The memory of that conversation hit me with new significance. Had Taylor been the one to receive the Tiffany necklace on my joint savings account's dime? Was she the one who would be enjoying overwater bungalows in the Maldives while my mother struggled through cancer treatments we couldn't afford? The thought made bile rise in my throat. There had been other warnings, too. Ones that had nothing to do with another woman and everything to do with Lucas himself. The growing materialism, the fixation on status symbols, the way he'd begun measuring his worth, and increasingly mine, by financial metrics and social standing. "We should be further along by now," he'd say, comparing our life to those of his colleagues. "Davis just bought a vacation home in Aspen. Johnson's kid is at that elite private school." I'd remind him that we had different priorities, that we were saving for our future family, for experiences rather than possessions. He'd agree in the moment, but those conversations became more frequent, more pointed. When I received a modest raise at the nonprofit where I worked, his congratulations had come with a subtle barb. "That's great, babe." Though in the corporate world, that would barely register as a cost of living adjustment. Little by little, he'd begun making me feel small, as if my contributions, both financial and otherwise, were somehow less valuable than his. As if I should be grateful that he was the primary breadwinner, that he allowed me to work in a field I was passionate about rather than one that maximized earning potential. I'd internalized those messages more than I realized. They had eroded my confidence, my sense of equal partnership in our marriage. They had prepared the ground for me to accept his dismissal of my mother's needs as somehow reasonable, even prudent. There was one memory that stood out from the rest, a conversation so telling I should have recognized it as the turning point it was. We were discussing our 10th anniversary, still 2 years away, but something I'd been excited to plan for. "I've always dreamed of going somewhere truly special for our 10th, I'd said one evening. "Maybe the Maldives? Those overwater bungalows look incredible." Lucas had glanced up from his phone with an odd expression. Not enthusiasm, not dismissal, but something more calculated. The Maldives are expensive, very expensive. I know, I'd acknowledged. That's why I'm bringing it up now. We could start saving specifically for it. Make it our big 10th anniversary gift to ourselves. He'd nodded slowly, still with that strange look. Maybe, if we can afford it by then. If we can afford it. The man who had just spent nearly $15,000 on a luxury vacation with another woman had made me feel unreasonable for wanting to plan a special anniversary trip 2 years in advance. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. Lucas wasn't just a cheater. He was a manipulator who had systematically diminished my expectations while elevating his own desires. He had created a world where my wants were impractical splurges, while his were justified entitlements, and I had let him do it. I had participated in my own diminishment, accepted the gradual redefinition of our partnership into something unrecognizable from what we'd started with. The thought filled me not just with anger at Lucas, but with a new emotion, disappointment in myself. How had I let this happen? When had I stopped being an equal partner and become instead a supporting character in Lucas's story? As these realizations washed over me, my phone buzzed with another text from Lucas. Might need to go to Chicago a day early for the conference. We'll let you know. Chicago, the business conference that was actually a romantic getaway to the Maldives. Another lie, so casually delivered. I set the phone down without responding, a strange calm settling over me. The time for denial had passed. The time for accepting whatever crumbs of truth Lucas deigned to share was over. In that moment, I made a decision, not just about what to do with my discovery of his betrayal, but about who I wanted to be moving forward. I was done being passive, done accepting less than I deserved, done prioritizing Lucas's desires over my own needs and my mother's. I looked again at the reservation details for the Maldives trip. Paradise Resorts required the remaining balance to be paid upon arrival, but they also had a policy about modifications and cancellations. All changes had to be made at least 72 hours before check-in. Lucas and his girlfriend would be arriving in just under a week, which meant I had 3 days to decide exactly how I wanted to handle this situation. 3 days to reclaim my power. 3 days to ensure that Lucas understood what it felt like to have the rug pulled out from under him. Whatever I decided, one thing was certain. I would no longer be the woman who looked the other way, the woman who made excuses for her husband's behavior, the woman who doubted her own worth, that Kelly was gone, and she wasn't coming back. I slept surprisingly well that night, a deep, dreamless sleep that seemed to draw a line between who I had been yesterday and who I was becoming today. When I woke, the crushing pain I had expected was replaced by something different, a cold, clear purpose that sharpened my thoughts and steadied my hands. Before Lucas left for work, I played my part perfectly. I smiled over coffee, asked about his day ahead, mentioned that I'd be visiting my mother at the hospital. Not a word about what I knew, not a flicker of the rage and betrayal churning beneath my calm exterior. I'll be home late again, he said, straightening his tie in the hallway mirror. Presentation for the Williams account tomorrow. No problem, I replied, impressed by my own steady voice. I've got plenty to keep me busy. He kissed my cheek, the casual, distracted kiss of someone going through the motions, and headed out the door. I watched him drive away, wondering if he was texting Taylor already, coordinating details for their upcoming getaway. The thought should have devastated me. Instead, it hardened my resolve. I gave myself 1 hour to feel everything, to cry, to scream into a pillow, to let the full weight of his betrayal crash over me. 60 minutes to mourn the death of my marriage, the loss of the future I had believed in. Then I dried my tears, washed my face, and got to work. First, I called my mother's oncologist. Without mentioning the specifics of my situation, I asked about payment plans for the experimental treatment, about timelines and success rates. The doctor was clear. While no outcome was guaranteed, patients who began this protocol earlier had significantly better responses. Waiting even a month could make a crucial difference. If financial concerns are the primary obstacle, he said gently, I'd encourage you to explore all options. This treatment shows considerable promise for cases like your mother's. All options. The words echoed in my mind as I hung up the phone. Lucas had removed certain options from the table, deemed them too expensive while simultaneously spending a small fortune on his affair. But he wasn't the only one who could make financial decisions. Not anymore. Next, I called Olivia, my closest friend since college and, conveniently, a divorce attorney. I need to meet with you, I said when she answered. Professionally, not socially. There was a pause on the other end. Kelly? What's going on? I'll explain everything in person, but I need to know my options. All of them. As soon as possible. To her credit, Olivia didn't press for details. She cleared her schedule for lunch, and 3 hours later, I was sitting in her office, laying out everything I had discovered. The missing money, the Maldives reservation, the pattern of deception. Olivia listened without interruption, her professional mask slipping only occasionally to reveal flashes of outrage on my behalf. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. Okay, first things first. Documentation. We need to preserve all evidence of his financial infidelity before he realizes you know and tries to cover his tracks. She walked me through the process. What to save? How to save it? What additional information I should try to gather? Then she turned to the more complex questions. About the money, she said carefully. Legally, you have every right to access your joint savings account. That money belongs to both of you, but his personal accounts are more complicated. I'm not planning to empty his accounts, I assured her, though the thought had certainly crossed my mind. I just want what's fair. What's mine? Fair and legal aren't always the same thing, Olivia cautioned. I understand the temptation to take action, especially given the circumstances with your mother's treatment. But we need to be strategic here. We spent the next hour discussing options, potential pitfalls, and the likely timeline for divorce proceedings. By the time we finished, I had a clear understanding of the road ahead, and it wasn't going to be quick or easy. One last thing, Olivia said as I gathered my things to leave. As your friend, not your lawyer, are you sure this is what you want? No chance of reconciliation? I considered the question seriously. Was there any version of the future where I could forgive Lucas, rebuild trust, move forward together? He chose a luxury vacation with his girlfriend over my mother's cancer treatment, I said finally. Even if I could forgive the affair, I can't forgive that calculation. That level of selfishness. He showed me exactly who he is and what matters to him. Olivia nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then we'll make sure you come out of this with what you deserve. I left her office feeling both lighter and heavier. Lighter from having shared my burden. Heavier from the knowledge that my marriage was truly over, that the painful process of disentangling our lives was just beginning. As I drove to the hospital to visit my mother, a plan began to take shape in my mind. Not just for the legal separation, but for something more immediate. Something that would ensure Lucas felt the consequences of his actions in a tangible, unmistakable way. My mother was having a good day when I arrived. The chemotherapy hadn't robbed her of her sharp wit or her uncanny ability to read my mood. Something's happened, she said as soon as I sat beside her bed. Tell me. I hesitated. She was fighting her own battle. Did she need the added stress of mine? But we had always been honest with each other, and I knew she would see through any attempt to shield her. I hesitated. She was fighting her own battle. Did she need the added stress of mine? But we had always been honest with each other, and I knew she would see through any attempt to shield her. So I told her everything, watching her face cycle through shock, anger, and then a fierce protective fury I hadn't seen since I was a child being bullied in elementary school. "That absolute bastard," she said when I finished, her voice low but intense. "Using my illness as his excuse while spending your money on some— Mom," I interrupted gently. "Your blood pressure." She took a deep breath, visibly reining in her anger. "What are you going to do?" I shared the outlines of the plan forming in my mind. Not just the long-term legal strategy Olivia and I had discussed, but the more immediate action I was contemplating. My mother listened carefully, her expression shifting from concern to something approaching admiration. When I finished, she reached for my hand. "Are you sure about this? There will be no going back." "I'm sure," I said, squeezing her fingers. "I've spent years compromising, accommodating, making excuses for his behavior. I'm done being that person." She studied my face for a long moment, then, with a decisive nod, "Good. It's about time." We spent the rest of the visit discussing her treatment options, the logistics of the experimental protocol, and how we would manage the costs. I didn't tell her exactly what I planned to do about the money. Some things were better left unsaid, even between mothers and daughters. When I left the hospital, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. That seemed oblivious to the turmoil of human lives below. I sat in my car, watching the colors deepen, and felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The Kelly who had awakened yesterday morning, trusting, naive, willing to shrink herself to fit within the boundaries Lucas defined, was gone. In her place was someone I was just getting to know. A woman unwilling to accept betrayal, unwilling to be made small, unwilling to stand by while the people she loved suffered unnecessarily. I drove home slowly, turning over the details of my plan. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about justice, about consequences, about making sure Lucas understood that his actions affected real people. Me, my mother, and yes, even Taylor, who might not know she was dating a married man. Most. Of all, it was about reclaiming my agency, my power to shape my own life, rather than merely reacting to Lucas's choices. When I arrived home, the house was dark and empty. Another late night at the office. Or perhaps another evening with Taylor, making final plans for their romantic getaway. The thought no longer devastated me. It strengthened my resolve. I settled at the kitchen table with my laptop, took a deep breath, and began implementing the first phase of my plan. It was time to ensure that Lucas's carefully constructed house of lies came crashing down around him, and I knew exactly where to start. The next morning, I moved with a sense of purpose. That felt almost foreign after months of uncertainty and compromise. Lucas had already left for work, earlier than usual, with a mumbled excuse about a breakfast meeting. I waited until I heard his car pull away, then set my plan in motion. First, I called my bank and scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor for that afternoon. Then I created a new email account, one Lucas had no knowledge of, and began the process of establishing my financial independence. I redirected my next paycheck to a new account under my name only, updated contact information on my personal credit cards, and made a list of all the automatic payments that would need to be transferred. These practical steps were necessary groundwork, but they weren't the heart of my plan. That would come next. I logged into our joint savings account, the one Lucas had rated for his romantic getaway, and transferred $15,000 into my new personal account. Not the entire balance, just slightly more than what he had taken. Enough to cover my mother's initial treatment costs, with a small cushion for emergencies. Was it petty to match his withdrawal almost to the dollar? Perhaps, but there was a symmetry to it that felt right. He had prioritized his desires over my mother's health. I was simply rebalancing the scales. Next came the more delicate part of the plan. I logged into Lucas's personal account, the one containing the money he had transferred from our savings, the one that would be funding his Maldives vacation. I didn't empty it. I didn't even take most of it. What I did was more surgical, more precise in its impact. I found the pending reservation at Paradise Resorts Maldives and studied the details. The remaining balance, just over $8,000, was to be paid upon arrival. The reservation included a romantic over-water villa, champagne service, couples massages, and a private sunset dinner on the beach. All for Mr. and Mrs. Lucas Whitaker. A detail that made me wonder if Taylor knew she was posing as me, or if Lucas had simply used our married status for convenience. Either way, it was time to make some adjustments. I called the resort directly, using the confirmation number from Lucas's email. When the cheerful reservations agent answered, I adopted my most polite, slightly apologetic tone. "Hi there, this is Kelly Whitaker. My husband made a reservation for next week, but we need to make some changes." The agent located the reservation and confirmed the details. "How can I help you modify your stay, Mrs. Whitaker?" "Unfortunately, my husband will no longer be able to join for the trip," I explained, letting a note of disappointment creep into my voice. "So I'll be traveling alone and would like to switch to a smaller villa." "I'm so sorry to hear that," the agent said with practiced sympathy. "We do have garden villas available which are perfect for solo travelers. Would you like me to make that change for you?" "That would be wonderful," I agreed. "And could you please update the reservation to be under my name only, Kelly Whitaker?" After confirming a few more details and adjusting some of the couple's activities to solo experiences, I had successfully transformed Lucas's romantic getaway into my personal retreat. The new arrangement also reduced the total cost by nearly $4,000, money that would remain in Lucas's account, untouched by me. I wasn't stealing from him. I was simply ensuring that the vacation he had planned with our joint savings would benefit me instead of his mistress. The moral calculus seemed fair, even if the legal ground was somewhat murky. With the reservation modified, I moved to the next phase. I found the airline confirmation for the 2 first-class tickets and noted the details. Lucas and Taylor Morgan, so that was her full name, departing next Tuesday. I called the airline, once again presenting myself as the person handling travel arrangements. "I need to make a change to a reservation," I explained to the agent. "My husband's business trip has been extended, so he'll need to fly directly to his next destination, and I'll be traveling alone." The agent was accommodating, canceling Lucas's ticket and converting the credit to a voucher in his name, which I knew would be automatically emailed to him. I kept Taylor's ticket intact, with one critical change. I switched her seat to economy class and applied the fare difference to upgrade my own seat to first class. Again, I wasn't taking his money. I was simply rearranging the experience he had, purchased with our joint funds. The reservation would still be there, the flights would still be available. But the romantic couple's vacation he had planned would be transformed into something quite different. As I worked, I felt a strange combination of emotions. Satisfaction, certainly, but also a deep sadness for what these actions represented. I was dismantling the future Lucas had planned, just as he had dismantled the future we had promised each other. There was no joy in it, only a grim determination to ensure that his betrayal carried consequences he couldn't simply charm or lie his way out of. By noon, the modifications were complete. Lucas's perfectly planned romantic getaway now existed, in a form he wouldn't recognize, and wouldn't discover until it was too late to fix. The airline voucher would alert him that something had changed, but the resort confirmation would still show an active reservation, just with modified details he wouldn't see unless he checked specifically. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath, examining my feelings. Was this wrong? Was I stooping to his level? The question troubled me enough that I called Olivia for a quick consultation. "You've created a paper trail showing you had access to these accounts all along, with his knowledge," she reminded me after I explained what I'd done. The money from the joint account is legally as much yours as his. The modifications to the reservations are in a gray area, but you haven't stolen anything. You've simply changed plans he made using your joint resources. And the practical impact? I asked. He'll be furious, Olivia said bluntly. But it gives us leverage. It shows you're not going to be passive in this process. Just be prepared for the fallout. The fallout. Yes, there would certainly be that. Lucas would not take this quietly. His carefully constructed plans disrupted, his deception exposed. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of his reaction. I wasn't worried about keeping the peace, about being reasonable, about accommodating his needs and desires at the expense of my own. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the bank, securing my financial future as best I could in the short term. I explained enough of my situation to ensure the advisor understood the urgency without sharing the humiliating details of Lucas's infidelity. By the end of the meeting, I had a clear plan for the coming months, a financial bridge to carry me from this marriage to whatever came next. On my way home, I stopped at the hospital again. My mother was sleeping when I arrived, the harsh chemicals, fighting her cancer taking their toll on her energy. I sat beside her bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, and made a silent promise. She would get the treatment she needed. I would make sure of it, with or without Lucas's support. As I sat there, my phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. Dinner meeting just came up. Don't wait up. Another lie. Another evening spent with Taylor, perhaps. Or maybe just another excuse to avoid coming home to a marriage he had already abandoned in all but name. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I took my mother's frail hand in mine and whispered the truth we both needed to hear. We're going to be okay. Both of us. And for the first time since discovering Lucas's betrayal, I actually believed it. For the next 3 days, I maintained a perfect facade. I made dinner, asked about Lucas's day, and pretended everything was normal. Meanwhile, I continued quietly preparing for the storm I knew was coming. I gathered important documents, secured copies of financial records, and met again with Olivia to finalize our strategy. Lucas remained oblivious, too absorbed in his own deception to notice mine. He continued coming home late, texting about work emergencies, and mentioning his upcoming Chicago conference with practiced casualness. Each lie strengthened my resolve. Each fabrication confirmed I was making the right choice. I'll be leaving. Tuesday morning, he reminded me on Monday night as we prepared for bed. Back Sunday evening. I've got the itinerary somewhere if you need it. Don't worry about it, I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'll be fine on my own. He nodded, relieved by my apparent disinterest, and turned his attention back to his phone. Texting Taylor, no doubt, with last-minute plans for their getaway. Tuesday morning arrived bright and clear. Lucas left early for his flight to Chicago, kissing me goodbye with a tenderness that now felt like another lie. I watched him drive away, knowing that the next time I saw him, everything would be different. I had taken the day off work, partly to visit my mother, but mostly to be available when reality finally caught up with Lucas. The airline would have sent him the notification about his changed ticket, but if he was like most people, he'd only glance at the confirmation time and flight number without reading the details. The real shock would come at the airport. At 10:47 a.m., exactly 17 minutes after his scheduled departure time, my phone rang. Lucas's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello? What the hell did you do? His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. I'm not sure what you mean, I replied calmly. Don't play games with me, Kelly. He was practically hissing now. My ticket was canceled and converted to a voucher, and Taylor's been downgraded to economy. The agent said the changes were made by my wife. How interesting, I said. my voice remaining steady despite my racing heart. Your wife modified the tickets for your business trip to Chicago? That seems odd, doesn't it? There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. Then, you know? Yes, Lucas. I know everything. About Taylor. About the Maldives. About how you stole from our savings to fund your romantic getaway while telling me we couldn't afford my mother's cancer treatment. I can explain? I'm sure you can. I cut him off. You've always been good at explanations, at justifications, at making yourself the hero of every story. But I'm not interested anymore. Where's Taylor? He demanded, changing tactics. What did you tell her? I didn't tell her anything, I said truthfully. Her ticket is still valid, just not in first class anymore. Whether she chooses to use it is up to her. I could almost hear his mind racing, calculating how to salvage the situation. Always the strategist, my husband. The resort reservation, he said suddenly. What did you do to that? Nothing drastic, I assured him. It's still there, just modified slightly. You might want to check the details. I heard muffled sounds, as he presumably pulled up the confirmation on his phone. Then a string of curses that would have shocked me once, before I knew who he really was. You changed it to your name, he said incredulously. You canceled my access to the villa. You used our joint savings the way it was meant to be used, I finished for him. For something important, not for cheating on your wife. This is insane, Lucas sputtered. You can't just... I'll call the resort. Fix this right now. You could try, I conceded. But the reservation is now under my name only, and I've added special instructions that any changes must be verified with me directly. Plus, I believe Taylor is standing right there with you, probably wondering what's happening. Are you going to explain it all to her now? In the middle of the airport? Another silence, this one longer and heavier. I could picture him standing there, trapped between fury and calculation, between the lie he'd constructed and the truth now crashing around him. Kelly. His voice had changed, softened into the persuasive tone he used to close difficult deals. Look, I know you're upset. You have every right to be. But we should talk about this in person. Let me come home and we can... No, I said firmly. There's nothing to talk about. Not anymore. What about our marriage? He asked, a note of desperation creeping in. 8 years, Kelly. You're throwing away 8 years over one mistake? The sheer audacity of his characterization nearly took my breath away. One mistake. As if the calculated deception, the financial theft, the callous disregard for my mother's health could be reduced to a single moment of poor judgment. This wasn't a mistake, Lucas. It was a choice. A series of choices, actually. Each one revealing exactly who you are and what matters to you. And what about the money? He demanded, his conciliatory tone evaporating. You took $15,000 from our joint account. For my mother's treatment, I confirmed. The one you said we couldn't afford while you were planning your luxury vacation with Taylor. I'd say that makes us even, wouldn't you? I could hear him breathing heavily, probably imagining all the things he'd like to say or do to me in that moment. Finally, in a voice of forced control, "This isn't over, Kelly." "Actually, it is," I replied. "I've already spoken to a divorce attorney. You'll be hearing from her soon." "You're making a huge mistake," he warned, anger giving way to something colder, more calculated. "You have no idea what you're doing." "For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I'm doing," I told him. "Goodbye, Lucas." I ended the call before he could respond, my hands trembling but my resolve intact. I had expected to feel vindicated after this confrontation, perhaps even triumphant. Instead, I felt oddly hollow, as if I'd just closed a book I'd been reading, for years, one whose ending had disappointed me deeply. My phone immediately began buzzing with text messages from Lucas. "Answer your phone." "This is ridiculous. You're being irrational. We need to talk about this like adults." I silenced the notifications and set the phone aside. There would be more messages, more calls, more attempts to regain control of the situation. Lucas wasn't a man who accepted defeat easily, especially not at the hands of someone he had underestimated. But I had anticipated this. Olivia had prepared me for the likelihood that once confronted, Lucas would cycle through various tactics: anger, manipulation, attempts at reconciliation, threats, bargaining. The key was to remain firm, to not engage beyond what was absolutely necessary. I had done what needed to be done. I had reclaimed what was mine, not just the money, but my sense of agency, my right to make decisions about my own life and my mother's care. The rest would unfold as it would, regardless of Lucas's efforts to rewrite the narrative. My phone rang again, this time with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Kelly?" A woman's voice, tense and uncertain. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Who's this?" "This is Taylor. Taylor Morgan." A pause. Then, "Lucas's colleague." The euphemism almost made me laugh. Colleague? Is that how he had described their relationship to her? "Hello, Taylor," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm guessing Lucas suggested you call me." "No, he doesn't know I'm calling," she said quickly. "He's arguing with the ticket agent, trying to fix our flights. I just need to know what's going on. He said there was some kind of misunderstanding with his wife about a work trip, but something doesn't feel right." The hesitation in her voice, the careful way she was choosing her words. Suddenly I understood. She didn't know, or at least she wasn't certain. "Taylor," I said gently, "I think you and I might have been told very different stories about this trip." "What do you mean?" "Lucas is my husband," I said plainly. "We've been married for 8 years, and the trip to the Maldives wasn't a work trip. It was paid for with money from our joint savings account. Money that was supposed to help with my mother's cancer treatment." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then silence. I waited, giving her space to process what I'd just revealed. "He told me he was separated," she finally said, her voice small. "That the divorce was being finalized. That his that you were making things difficult about money." "He told me he was separated," Taylor had said, the words hanging between us like a dense fog. "That the divorce was being finalized." Another lie. Another person manipulated by Lucas's web of deception. I felt a surprising surge of compassion for this woman I had imagined as my enemy just hours before. "We're not separated, Taylor," I said gently. "At least we weren't until today. There's no divorce in progress. And from what I can see in our accounts, the two of you have been seeing each other for at least 6 months. I heard a shaky exhale on the other end of the line. 8 months, she corrected quietly. "We've been together 8 months. 8 months. The revelation hit me harder than I expected. While I'd been caring for my mother through her diagnosis, while I'd been working overtime to contribute more to our savings, Lucas had been building a parallel life with another woman. "I'm so sorry," Taylor continued, her voice steadier now. "I had no idea. I mean, I had suspicions sometimes, things that didn't quite add up. But he always had explanations, and I wanted to believe him." "I understand," I told her. And I did. Hadn't I also chosen to believe Lucas's explanations? To ignore the warning signs? To trust him despite mounting evidence that something was wrong? He's very convincing. "What happens now?" she asked. "With the trip? With everything?" "That's up to you," I replied. "Your ticket is still valid, just not in first class. As for the resort, I've changed it to my name. I'm planning to use it. Actually, you're still going to the Maldives?" The surprise in her voice was evident. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I need some time away to think, to plan my next steps. And after what Lucas did, I think I've Earned a vacation, don't you? A startled laugh escaped her. I guess you have. We spoke for a few more minutes, sharing details of Lucas's deceptions that confirmed he had been playing us both. By the time we ended the call, I felt an unexpected sense of solidarity with Taylor. We had both been victims of the same man's manipulation, both been drawn in by his charm and confidence, both chosen to ignore red flags because we wanted to believe in the version of Lucas he presented to us. As I hung up, my phone immediately lit up with more messages from Lucas, increasingly desperate, increasingly angry. I silenced it again and turned my attention to packing. I had a flight to catch. The next 5 days were transformative in ways I couldn't have anticipated. While Lucas bombarded me with calls, texts, and eventually emails, all unanswered, I was floating in turquoise waters, soaking in the sun, and discovering parts of myself I had forgotten existed. I spent my mornings watching the sunrise from my garden villa's private deck, journaling my thoughts and feelings as they emerged. I dedicated my afternoons to exploring the island, snorkeling in vibrant coral reefs, and trying activities I'd always been curious about, but never prioritized. In the evenings, I dined alone, but not lonely, savoring exquisite meals while planning my new future. Each day brought increased clarity. Without Lucas's constant presence, his subtle critiques, his dismissive comments, his need to be the center of attention, I began to hear my own voice again. My own desires, my own ambitions. I remembered the woman I had been before our marriage, confident, independent, with dreams that extended beyond supporting someone else's career. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed those parts of myself to be diminished, convinced that compromise meant surrendering my own identity to preserve Lucas's ego. On my 3rd day in paradise, I received an unexpected message from Taylor. I didn't go to the Maldives, obviously, and I'm not seeing Lucas anymore. Just wanted you to know that I confronted him with everything after our call. He tried to spin more lies, but I wasn't having it. You deserve better. We both do. I sent back a simple, thank you, with a heart emoji, touched by her solidarity and her decision to break free from Lucas's manipulation. There was a strange comfort in knowing I wasn't alone in being deceived, in falling for the carefully crafted persona Lucas had perfected over the years. By the time I returned to the resort after a guided kayaking excursion on my 4th day, I had made some crucial decisions. I contacted Olivia from my villa, the sound of waves crashing outside my window, a soothing counterpoint to the serious legal discussion. I want to proceed with the divorce as quickly and cleanly as possible, I told her. No reconciliation, no counseling, no second chances. Are you sure? Olivia asked. Lucas has been calling my office daily, insisting that this is all a misunderstanding, that he wants to work things out. I'm sure, I said firmly. The man I married doesn't exist, Olivia. Maybe he never did. I need to move forward. We discussed strategy, how to protect my interests, how to ensure my mother's care remained funded, how to disentangle my life from Lucas's with minimal drama. By the end of the call, I had a clear roadmap for the coming months. Next, I called my mother's oncologist and scheduled the experimental treatment to begin the following week. The cost was significant, but with the money I'd reclaimed from our savings, it was manageable. The doctor was cautiously optimistic about her chances, especially now that we weren't delaying for financial reasons. We'll fight this together, I promised my mother when I called to tell her the news. No more waiting, no more compromises. I'm proud of you, she said softly. For taking control, for standing up for yourself. Your father would be proud too. Her words brought tears to my eyes. My father had passed away 5 years earlier, a kind, principled man who had adored my mother until his last breath. How different from the husband I had chosen. How had I missed the contrast for so long? On my final day in the Maldives, I took a solo sunset cruise around the island. As the sky exploded in shades of orange and pink, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Not just physically to this paradise, but emotionally to this place of strength and self-discovery. I thought about the money Lucas had stolen from our savings, intended for this very vacation with another woman. In a strange way, his betrayal had become a gift, the catalyst for my awakening, for reclaiming my power, for rediscovering the woman I had been and could be again. The Kelly who had discovered Lucas's deception just a week ago would have been devastated by the end of her marriage. She would have blamed herself, wondered what she could have done differently, perhaps even begged for another chance to make things work. But the Kelly watching this spectacular sunset felt something completely different, a profound sense of liberation. The pain was still there, the betrayal still raw, but overshadowing both was a growing excitement about what came next. A life redesigned on my own terms. A future limited only by my imagination, not by someone else's expectations. When I returned to my villa that evening, I found an email from Lucas, his 20th unanswered message since I'd left. Unlike the others, this one had a simple subject line. I understand now. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Kelly, I realize you may never read this, but I need to say it anyway. I've spent the past 5 days trying to blame you, to justify my actions, to convince myself that you're overreacting. But the truth is, I destroyed something precious because I was selfish and entitled. What I did to you was unforgivable. The money, the lies, Taylor, all of it. But worse was how I made you feel small, how I dismissed your mother's needs, how I put my wants above everything and everyone else. I won't ask for another chance. I don't deserve one. I just want you to know that I see it now. What I've done, who I've become, and I'm sorry. Be happy, Kelly. You deserve that more than anyone I know. Lucas. I read the message twice, searching for the manipulative undertones I'd come to expect from him. But for once, Lucas seemed to be speaking plainly, without agenda or calculation. I closed the email without responding. Perhaps someday I would acknowledge his apology, when the wound wasn't so fresh, when I could do so without reopening the door to his influence in my life. For now, it was enough to know that he recognized the damage he had caused. As I packed my bags for the return flight, I felt a quiet certainty settling in my bones. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Divorce rarely is, especially when significant assets are involved. Lucas might have had a moment of clarity, but that didn't mean he would make the legal process simple or fair. But I was ready. The woman returning home was not the same one who had discovered her husband's betrayal a week ago. She was stronger, clearer about her boundaries, unwilling to accept less than she deserved. The money that Lucas had intended to spend on betrayal had instead funded my rebirth. There was a poetic justice in that transformation, a symmetry that felt like the universe's way of balancing the scales. Tomorrow, I would return to real life, to divorce proceedings and medical appointments, to rebuilding and reimagining. But I would carry this week with me, this precious time of rediscovery, this peaceful interlude between the life I had accepted and the life I would create. The flight home from the Maldives gave me 8 uninterrupted hours to prepare myself for what lay ahead. I expected chaos, Lucas demanding explanations, friends asking uncomfortable questions, colleagues whispering behind my back. What I didn't expect was the bombshell waiting in my inbox when I connected to airport Wi-Fi during my layover in Dubai. The email came from Carter Williams, Lucas's closest friend and colleague. The subject line was cryptic. You should know the whole truth. I hesitated before opening it. Carter had been in Lucas's life since college, his loyal wingman through every phase of his career. If anyone would defend Lucas's actions or try to persuade me to reconsider the divorce, it would be Carter. But curiosity won out, and I clicked on the message. Kelly, This is probably the last thing you want right now, but I can't stay silent anymore. What Lucas did to you was inexcusable, and you deserve to know that the Maldives trip was just the tip of the iceberg. The Taylor situation isn't new. Lucas has had a pattern of infidelity throughout your marriage, carefully hidden, compartmentalized, justified with the same excuses each time. I've looked the other way, told myself it wasn't my business. I regret that now. But there's more. The reason your joint savings had become so important to Lucas recently isn't just about the affair. He's in serious financial trouble. The success he's been projecting, the expensive suits, the luxury car, the lavish client dinners, it's been built on mounting debt and increasingly risky investments. 3 months ago, he borrowed $50,000 from me, swearing it was a temporary cash flow issue. Last week, I discovered he's been using that money not to stabilize his finances as promised, but to maintain appearances while digging himself deeper. I'm telling you this not to hurt you further, but because you need to protect yourself. Whatever. Financial arrangements you're making for the divorce? Be careful. The Lucas you thought you knew, the successful, financially secure provider, doesn't exist anymore. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry. Carter. I read the email 3 times, each reading bringing a new wave of shock. It wasn't just that Lucas had cheated. He had constructed an entire false reality, presenting himself as the successful provider while secretly drowning in debt. All those times he'd made me feel small for my modest nonprofit salary, for my impractical career choices, while he was borrowing money to maintain his facade of success. The revelation should have devastated me, but instead, I felt an odd sense of validation. This wasn't about me. It had never been about me. Lucas's behavior, the criticism, the affairs, the financial control, stemmed from his own insecurities, his desperate need to appear successful at any cost. I forwarded Carter's email to Olivia, with a brief note, "We need to talk about this ASAP." Then I boarded my connecting flight, my mind racing with implications. By the time I arrived home, Olivia had already begun investigating. She called as I was unlocking my front door, stepping into the house that no longer felt like mine. "Carter's information checks out," she said without preamble. "I had my team do some digging. Lucas has 3 maxed-out credit cards, a second mortgage you weren't aware of, and significant investments in high-risk ventures that have tanked. He's at least $200,000 in debt, possibly more." I sank onto the sofa, surveying the living room that suddenly seemed filled with props rather than a life we'd built together. The expensive artwork Lucas had insisted we needed. The designer furniture. That was an investment in our future. All of it purchased with money we didn't have, to create an impression that wasn't real. "What does this mean for the divorce?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "It changes our strategy completely," Olivia replied. "You're in a stronger position than we thought, but also potentially at greater risk. He's going to be desperate to maintain access to your income, to your good credit score. We need to move quickly to protect your assets." We spent the next hour outlining a revised approach, immediate financial separation, forensic accounting to trace where the money had gone, protective measures to ensure Lucas couldn't incur more debt in my name. "What about the house?" I asked, looking around at the space that had once represented our shared future. "Given what we now know, selling is your best option," Olivia advised. "The equity should be split, but we'll push for a larger percentage. For you, given the circumstances." As we wrapped up the call, another thought occurred to me. What about my mother's treatment? If Lucas's finances are this bad, "The money you transferred from your joint savings is secure," Olivia assured. "Ours, you acted before there were any liens or judgments against the account. That was lucky timing." Lucky timing, or perhaps instinct. Some part of me had sensed the urgency, had known on a level I wasn't consciously aware of that I needed to act quickly to protect what mattered most. After ending the call with Olivia, I walked through the house, really seeing it for the first time in years. The carefully curated space told the story of the people Lucas wanted us to be, not who we actually were. The formal dining room we rarely used. The home office furnished with an antique desk that cost more than my first car. The guest bedroom, decorated for visitors who never came. I opened the closet in our bedroom, Lucas's side filled with designer suits, custom shirts, shoes that cost a month's salary at my nonprofit. The physical manifestation of his deception hanging neatly in a row. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Kelly, it's Carter. Just checking you got my email. I know it was a lot to take in. Let me know if I can help with anything. Else?" I hesitated, then replied, "I got it. Thank you for telling me the truth. It explains a lot." His response came quickly. "There's one more thing. Lucas doesn't know I've reached out to you, but he's been trying to liquidate assets, move money around. Be careful." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Lucas is increasingly frantic. Messages during my time in the Maldives, his sudden understanding in that final email. They weren't just about saving our marriage. They were about saving himself from financial ruin. I thanked Carter again, then sat on the edge of the bed, processing this new reality. The man I had married, the successful, confident provider who had made me feel less than for my more modest career, had been a fiction. A carefully maintained illusion that was now crumbling, revealing the deeply insecure, morally compromised man beneath. In a strange way, the revelation was liberating. The doubts I'd carried, that I wasn't successful enough for Lucas, that I didn't contribute enough to our partnership, that my work wasn't as valuable as his, were based on a comparison with something that didn't exist. I had been measuring myself against a mirage. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Lucas. After a week of ignoring his calls, I decided to answer. It was time to face reality. All of it. Kelly. His voice was carefully controlled, the confident, business tone he used when trying to manage difficult situations. "I'm glad you picked up. We need to talk." "Yes, we do," I agreed calmly. "I know about the debt, Lucas. All of it." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, "What are you talking about?" "Please don't," I said wearily. "Carter told me everything. The credit cards, the second mortgage, the failed investments." "I know." Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, the confident facade had cracked. "Carter had no right. He doesn't understand the whole picture. I can fix this, Kelly. I just need some time." "Time isn't going to fix this," I told him. "Not the debt, not the affairs, not the lies you've been telling me for years." "Affairs?" His voice rose sharply. "Taylor was a mistake, yes. But—" "Stop lying," I interrupted. "I know about the others, too." A heavy exhalation on the other end of the line. "Kelly, please. I know I've made mistakes, serious ones. But we can work through this together. We've built a life. We've built a house of cards," I corrected him. "And it's collapsing, Lucas. I'm not going to be buried in the rubble with you." "What do you want?" he asked, defeat creeping into his voice. "Money? The house? What will it take to fix this?" "It can't be fixed," I said simply. "But it can be ended cleanly. Olivia will be contacting your lawyer with terms. I suggest you cooperate." "And if I don't?" A hint of the old Lucas emerged, calculating, looking for leverage. "Then everyone will know," I said quietly. "Your clients, your colleagues, your family, everyone will know that the successful Lucas Whitaker is drowning in debt, cheating on his wife, and using other people's money to fund his lifestyle. Is that what you want?" The threat hung between us, not delivered with malice, but with the simple clarity of truth. Lucas had spent years constructing his image, his reputation. It was the foundation of everything he valued. I'll cooperate, he said finally. But Kelly, I did love you. That part wasn't a lie. I considered his words, searching for the emotion I should feel. Anger, perhaps, or vindication. Instead, I felt only a profound weariness, a desire to close this chapter and begin the next. Goodbye, Lucas, I said, and ended the call. Setting down the phone, I looked around the bedroom we had shared, at the life built on appearances and deception. Tomorrow, I would start packing, begin the process of dismantling this elaborate stage set. But tonight, I simply needed to rest, to absorb the truth and prepare for what came next. The financial revelation should have terrified me. Instead, it clarified everything. The husband who had made me feel inadequate was himself a fraud. The marriage I had fought to save had been built on illusion. As I changed into comfortable clothes and opened the windows to let in fresh air, I felt something unexpected. Not grief, not anger, but a powerful sense of freedom. The truth, however painful, had set me free. 3 weeks after my return from the Maldives, Lucas and I met face-to-face for the first time in Olivia's office. The contrast between us was striking. I arrived calm and collected, dressed in a simple but elegant outfit I'd purchased with my own money. Lucas looked haggard, his designer suit slightly rumpled, dark circles under his eyes betraying his sleepless nights. "Thank you both for coming," Olivia began, her professional tone setting the stage for what would follow. "We're here to discuss the terms of your separation and the path toward divorce." Lucas's attorney, a sharp-looking man named Ben who had reportedly built his career saving wealthy men from expensive divorces, nodded curtly. "We're prepared to be reasonable, but my client has some concerns about the preliminary terms you've sent over." I glanced at Lucas, who was studying his hands, avoiding my gaze. "Before we get into specifics," Olivia replied, "I think we should address the financial disclosures Mr. Whitaker has provided. They appear to be incomplete." Ben shifted uncomfortably. "My client has been fully transparent about the marital assets." "Not according to our forensic accountant," Olivia countered, sliding a folder across the table. "We've identified multiple accounts, significant debt, and financial activities that weren't included in Mr. Whitaker's disclosure." The room fell silent as Ben skimmed the documents, his expression darkening with each page. Lucas continued to stare at his hands, the confident, charismatic man I'd married nowhere to be found. "We'll need time to review these findings," Ben finally said. "Of course," Olivia agreed pleasantly. "But in the meantime, we'd like to discuss the house. Given Mr. Whitaker's financial situation, we believe the most prudent course is to sell it and divide the proceeds according to our proposed allocation." Lucas's head snapped up. "I'm not selling the house." It was the first time he'd spoken, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Lucas," his attorney cautioned, but he pressed on. "That house is the one solid asset we have," Lucas insisted. "I can restructure my debt, get back on my feet, but not if we sell. The house has a second mortgage you took out without my knowledge." "Or consent," I reminded him, my voice steady. "It's no longer the asset you think it is." Lucas turned to me, his expression shifting from defiance to something more calculated, the face he wore when closing a difficult deal. "Kelly, be reasonable. If we sell now, we're both taking a loss. Give me 6 months to turn things around and we'll both come out ahead." 6 months. 6 more months of being tied to Lucas's financial decisions, of watching him try to resurrect his crumbling facade with more risky ventures and desperate measures. 6 more months of being accessories to his delusion. "No," I said simply. The single word hung in the air between us. Lucas blinked, clearly not expecting such direct refusal. "No?" he repeated incredulously. "Just like that? 8 years of marriage, and you won't even consider what's best for both of us?" "I am considering what's best for both of us," I replied. "A clean break. financial separation, the chance to start over without the weight of each other's expectations or disappointments. "This is because of the Maldives," he said, his voice hardening. "You're punishing me for one mistake." I felt a familiar emotion rising, the need to explain, to justify, to make him understand. But this time I recognized it for what it was. The remnant of an old pattern where my feelings required validation from Lucas to be real. "This isn't about punishment," I said instead. "It's about finally prioritizing my needs after years of diminishing them to accommodate yours." Lucas leaned forward, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he'd used so effectively throughout our marriage. "Kelly, I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible mistakes. But we built a life together. Doesn't that count for something?" I studied his face, the face I had once loved, had once believed in completely. There was sincerity there, perhaps even genuine regret. But behind it, I could still see the calculation, the man measuring how much contrition to display to achieve his desired outcome. "Yes," I agreed. "It counts for something. It counts as a chapter in both our lives that's now ending. The divorce settlement should be fair to both of us, Lucas. But fair doesn't mean you get to dictate the terms anymore." His expression hardened. "So that's it? You've made up your mind? And nothing I say matters?" "What would you say?" I asked quietly. "That you're sorry? That you'll change? That the affairs and the lies and the financial deception were all aberrations, not indicative of who you really are?" I shook my head. "I've heard it all before, Lucas. I don't believe it anymore." The mask slipped completely then. "You'd be nothing without me," he snapped, old resentments flooding to the surface. "Your little nonprofit job, your community service, projects. I supported all of that. I carried us while you played at having a career. There it was, the real Lucas, the one who had always seen my work as less valuable, my contributions as less significant. The one who had systematically diminished me to elevate himself. But his words didn't wound me as they once would have. Instead, I felt an unexpected surge of gratitude for the clarity his cruelty provided, for the final confirmation that I was making the right choice. "Thank you," I said, surprising everyone in the room, including myself. "For what?" Lucas asked, suspiciously. "For reminding me exactly why this marriage needs to end." I turned to Olivia. "I think we've said all that needs to be said today. Please proceed with the terms as we discussed." Olivia nodded, gathering her papers. "We'll email a revised proposal incorporating our findings by the end of the week. I suggest you review it carefully," she added, addressing Ben. As we prepared to leave, Lucas made one final attempt. "Your mother's treatment," he said quietly. "How are you managing that without my income?" The question was meant to unsettle me, to remind me of my financial dependence. Instead, it highlighted how little he understood about the woman I had become. "Mother's treatment is no longer your concern," I told him. "I'm handling it." And I was. Between the money I'd reclaimed from our savings, a promotion at the nonprofit I'd received while in the Maldives, and a part-time consulting role Olivia had connected me with, I was standing on my own financial feet, for the first time in years. As I walked out of the conference room, Lucas called after me, "This isn't over, Kelly." I turned back one last time, meeting his gaze directly. "Yes, Lucas, it is." And in that moment, we both knew it was true. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, morning light streaming through windows that faced east, my deliberate choice, a small daily reminder that each day brought new beginnings. The space was modest compared to the showcase home I'd shared with Lucas, but every corner reflected choices I'd made for myself, pieces of a life I was building on my own terms. The divorce had been finalized 4 months earlier. Not the quick, clean break I'd hoped for. Lucas had fought at every turn, deploying delaying tactics and emotional manipulation until his financial situation became so dire that settlement became his only viable option. In the end, he kept his luxury car and designer wardrobe, while I secured my freedom and enough resources to start over. My mother sat at the breakfast bar, sipping tea as I prepared a simple brunch for us. The experimental treatment had worked, better than anyone dared hope. While she wasn't completely cancer-free, her prognosis had improved dramatically, her energy returning bit by bit with each passing month. "Something smells wonderful," she said, watching me move confidently around the kitchen. "French toast with that cinnamon bread you love," I replied, sliding a perfectly golden piece onto her plate. Celebrating good news deserves good food. The good news had come yesterday. My nonprofit had received a major grant for a community initiative I'd designed, one that would provide support services for women rebuilding their lives after relationship trauma. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own experience had become the foundation for helping others. "I'm so proud of you," my mother said, reaching for my hand. "Not just for the grant, for everything, for how you've handled this past year." I squeezed her fingers gently. "I had a good example. You taught me resilience long before I needed it." We ate in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together, of having weathered our respective storms. Outside, spring was asserting itself after a long winter, new growth pushing through the soil in the small container garden on my balcony. "Have you heard anything from Lucas?" she asked eventually, the question tentative. "Carter mentioned he's taken a job in Seattle," I said. "Apparently, he's telling everyone it's a fantastic opportunity, but the reality is he needed to escape his debt and start fresh somewhere new." I felt no bitterness as I shared this update, just a distant sense of recognition, as if discussing a character from a book I'd read long ago, rather than the man who had once been the center of my world. "Do you ever regret it?" my mother asked. "Not the divorce, but using the money the way you did? Going to the Maldives instead of just keeping it for the treatment?" The question made me smile. My practical, straightforward mother had been surprisingly supportive of my impulsive decision to reclaim the vacation Lucas had planned with Taylor. "Not for a second," I told her honestly. That week changed everything for me. It wasn't just about spite or revenge, though I won't pretend those weren't factors. It was about proving to myself that I could take something meant to hurt me and transform it into something healing. And it had been healing. Those days of solitude and self-discovery, of reconnecting with parts of myself that had been dormant during my marriage. The woman who returned from that trip was fundamentally different from the one who had discovered her husband's betrayal. Stronger, clearer, unwilling to settle for less than she deserved. "The money was important for your treatment," I continued. "But that trip was essential for my treatment, for recovering from what Lucas had done to my sense of self." My mother nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Sometimes the most important journey isn't the one you take across the world, but the one you take back to yourself." "Exactly," I agreed. And I needed both. After brunch, we moved to the small balcony, enjoying the spring sunshine as we discussed plans for the coming months. The future, which had once seemed so frightening in its uncertainty, now felt full of possibility. "I ran into Sabrina yesterday," my mother mentioned casually. "She asked about you." Sabrina had been my closest friend before Lucas, the one who had expressed concerns when our relationship moved so quickly, who had gently suggested that perhaps I was losing myself in his larger-than-life personality. I had distanced myself from her, unwilling to hear the truth she was trying to share. "I've been meaning to call her," I admitted. "I owe her an apology." "She doesn't want an apology," my mother said. "She wants her friend back. Another piece of the puzzle, another relationship to rebuild." The process of reclaiming my life wasn't just about financial independence or professional accomplishments. It was about reconnecting with the community I had allowed to wither during my marriage, about rebuilding the support network Lucas had subtly encouraged me to abandon. Later that afternoon, after my mother had gone home, I sat down to write in the journal I'd started in the Maldives. The practice had become a daily ritual, a way to process my evolving understanding of what had happened and who I was becoming in its aftermath. 1 year ago today, I discovered my husband had stolen from our savings to take another woman on a luxury vacation while refusing to help with my mother's cancer treatment. It should have been the worst day of my life. In many ways it was. But it was also the beginning of something I couldn't have imagined then. A journey back to myself, to a life designed on my own terms rather than in response to someone else's expectations. What I've learned in this year of rebuilding: trust your instincts. They're usually right, even when your conscious mind isn't ready to accept what they're telling you. Financial independence isn't just about money, it's about agency, about the power to make choices based on your own values rather than someone else's priorities. The people who truly love you want you to be more of yourself, not less. They celebrate your growth rather than feeling threatened by it. Healing isn't linear. Some days you move forward, some days you slide back. Both are part of the process. And perhaps most importantly, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. The same event that breaks you can be the one that ultimately remakes you. Stronger, wiser, more authentically yourself than before. I closed the journal, feeling the familiar sense of peace that came with reflection. The pain of Lucas's betrayal hadn't disappeared entirely. I suspected it never would. But it had transformed into something different, something constructive rather than destructive. In using our joint savings to claim the vacation he had planned, with his girlfriend, I had done more than exact a measure of justice. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my power, toward asserting that my needs and desires mattered as much as his. Everything that followed, the divorce, the career growth, the rebuilt friendships, the new apartment, flowed from that initial act of self-respect, that refusal to be diminished by someone else's selfishness. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my balcony garden, I felt a profound gratitude for the journey of the past year. Not because it had been easy, it hadn't, but because it had been mine. Every decision, every struggle, every triumph had been shaped by my own values, my own priorities, my own understanding of what mattered most. Lucas had spent years making me feel small, making me doubt my worth outside the context of our marriage. In the end, his greatest gift to me had been the crisis that forced me to discover just how capable I truly was on my own. The woman who had once feared being without him now knew a fundamental truth. She had never needed him to be complete. She had only needed to remember who she was, to reclaim the strength and clarity that had been hers all along. And that was a lesson worth every painful step of the journey. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.